All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Tridium Talk on integrating custom modules with the security dashboard. We're extremely excited to launch this new series of Tridium Talks that will be exclusively tailored to our developer community. Over the past few months, we've had the opportunity to see some exciting new features, as well as some discussions on products or new happenings with Niagara. And this series is going to be specifically valuable for our customers that are out there developing products, services, solutions with the Niagara framework. So before we get started, just want to cover a few ground rules. As we move through the demonstration, you might have a question that you'd like to ask. And if you do, please feel free to insert that comment or that question in the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the presentation, we will do our best to address each accordingly. And in the event that we aren't able to do so, we will follow up with those questions offline, and then we'll post them as an artifact with this demonstration on Tridium.com. So with that being said, let's get started. So before we move any further, let's just, let's get updated with what's new with Niagara. Niagara 4.10 is now available. We released it about 2 months ago, and we've got a bunch of exciting new features that I think are really going to help you get the job done right, get it done quickly, and then also get the opportunity to win some new jobs, just due to the advanced tool set that we have here in Niagara 4.10. And now, more importantly, about a week ago, we just released Niagara 4.11 early access. So if you are interested in participating as an early access tester for Niagara 4.11, please let us know. Contact Tridium Beta Test at Tridium.com to get access. We've got a range of exciting new features, such as the HTML5 wire sheet. We've got TLS 1.3, BackNet Secure Connect, the archive history provider. These are all major features that are really going to add some substantial value to your projects and solutions delivered on the Niagara framework. But the reason that we're here, right, is we're here to talk about the security dashboard. We're talking about how I, as a developer, can integrate my modules for display on the Niagara Security Dashboard. So let's just briefly talk about why you should use the security dashboard in your Niagara station. So we're going to talk to each persona and try to tie the value props for each. So the security dashboard was introduced in Niagara 4.8, and it gives you an HTML5 view, which enables you to quickly assess the security posture of your building stations in a browser. So this is incredibly useful for a number of reasons. And when you think about the building owner, the facility engineer persona, this security dashboard is really going to save you valuable time and resources, because you're going to have a single interface by which you can promptly triage and remediate any potential cybersecurity issues for the protection of your buildings and your Niagara stations. Instead of having to jump through multiple views or having to check on different services, you have just a one-stop shop. So it really eliminates the duplication of efforts and just gives you that summary that you really need to have in order to be able to quickly respond to any potential security issue. And then, of course, because of that efficiency gain that you're getting, you're also going to have improved processes and operations across your facilities. And then if you have multiple contractors working within your facilities, working on your Niagara stations, the security dashboard is a fantastic tool to ensure that secure practices and principles are being leveraged across all of your sites. And of course, if you're an enterprise level customer, you've got multiple ones to deal with, and probably even more contractors. So this is going to be incredibly valuable for your efforts. Now, how about a developer or systems integrator? Now, why would I want to expose my modules on the security dashboard? Well, frankly speaking, it's going to put you in a position where you can win more project bids and customers. You're going to have your custom module that's going to be ready for integration and display on that security dashboard, such that your customer, the end user, can have that assuredness, can have that sense of security, knowing that you have crossed your T's, you've dotted your I's, and you have displayed your module proudly on the security dashboard. And then, of course, what it's going to do for you is it's going to actually save you valuable time and resources, because it's an extra point of accountability that customers otherwise would have had to, again, jump through multiple hoops just to verify that things are as secure as they need to be. So it really does provide that extra level of assuredness and security for your customers. So there are a number of items that we include on the security dashboard. And the reason we've included those is because we want to ensure that you have as many tools at your disposal to ensure that you have accountability, that you have the right items checked off. And I have the unique opportunity today to have two incredibly talented developers on the call with me who were responsible for developing the security dashboard. I have Blake Puhak and Melanie Coggin. And Blake, I'm very interested to hear your perspective, just due to the development that you had with this particular offering. And in your mind, as you were developing it, can you kind of shed some light on what does belong on the security dashboard and some of the reasons why?
Oh, absolutely, Stephen. So as you'll see in a couple of minutes, we've left the security dashboard APIs very open so that you could potentially put almost anything on the security dashboard. But since it is a security dashboard, we really want to limit the things that we display on there to things that are going to affect the security of your system. So if your module or your driver makes remote connections, whether it's to a database, a device, a web service, you want to put some information about those connections on the security dashboard. Is it using a secure protocol? Is it using TLS? Which version of TLS is it using? Which cipher suites does it support? Does it support the latest ones, or do you also need to have more older cipher suites for older connections to older devices enabled? If you're using certificates as part of your authentication or your security, you want to put the information about those up on the security dashboard. Are they expired? Are they valid? Are they self-signed? If there's anything protocol specific that your module is using, like each specific HTTP headers that may reveal information that you don't want revealed, or ones that are used to actually make that protocol a little more secure. You want to note whether or not those are enabled, whether they're being used, or exactly how they're configured to let the users know that they're configured correctly. If you need some sort of legacy support as part of your protocol, you want to note whether that's currently enabled or whether it's not. If you have any extra debug information built into your module, you want to note whether that's currently on or not. It's great to be able to turn that on and get extra information about what's going on under the covers, but that's not something you want to leave on all the time on a running system, as it could lead to some information leakage. So the status of any debug information is a great thing to have on the security dashboard. And any default values that are currently being used, especially around usernames and passwords, those are being used, definitely want to make note of it on the security dashboard. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Melanie Coggin to show you exactly what code you need to write to get your information up on the security dashboard.
Thank you, Blake, and hello to everyone. Today, we are going to learn about the Security Dashboard API by working with a custom module that implements an OpenID Connect authentication scheme. This would be a really cool module because OpenID Connect is widely supported and it's single sign-on, which everybody loves. In reality, I've actually only implemented a few classes and there's not any real functionality, but we're going to use the components that I've built to identify security controls and add them to the dashboard. To start, I've created an OpenID Connect authentication scheme, and I've added a few properties that would be important. We've got an identity provider endpoint, which is the URL that we'll be connecting to for authentication. We have a certificate, which will be used to verify the signature on our authentication tokens. OpenID Connect also allows you to optionally encrypt your Java Web Token, so we have a property for that. And our last property is a string that lets you specify which signature algorithms that you want to support. And I'm just going to do a little sidebar here to mention this facet that I've added to all these properties. The security facet is a facet that marks a property as something that's relevant to security. And it's a good idea to use it because it'll do things like add any changes to these properties to the security audit log. If somebody turns off encryption or changes the identity provider endpoint, it's important to know that it happened and who did it. And here's what our component looks like in Workbench. Now we're just going to take a minute to look at it and see what on here might belong on the dashboard. The first thing that I'm seeing is this URL. We probably want it to be an HTTPS URL. And we have an encryption option. And finally, we have the allowed signature algorithms. There are a lot of signature algorithms out there. And if something out of date makes it on this list, that's something that we want to see on the dashboard. So now we know what we want on the dashboard, and let's see how we get it there. There are three main interfaces to add items to the security dashboard. And the first is the security dashboard item provider. And this lets you add items to an existing card on the dashboard. The second is the security dashboard provider, and it'll add a whole new card to the dashboard. And the last is the security dashboard provider agent. And like the security dashboard provider, it adds a new card. But it's handled a little bit differently. It's not bound to a specific class, and it lets you separate your dashboard code from the code that's actually handling the functionality. I'm just going to take a quick moment to discuss some of the terminology that I've been using, cards and items. So this is a card, and it's just one of the rectangles on the dashboard, and it's made up of related items, and it links back to a single location, in this case, the web service. I went ahead and lowered some of the security settings so that we could see some variety on the card, but normally you would want everything to be all green check marks. In each card, you have a number of items like these ones, and each item consists of a status, a summary, and a description. In this view, we can't see all of those elements, but if we press on the More link, we get the full view. The status is represented by the red, yellow, or green icon, and the summary should be a short sentence that describes the current state of the control. The description is a little bit longer, and it should describe what the setting does, what the recommended setting is, and what the consequences are if you don't use the recommended setting. And as a developer, you'll be responsible for creating the status, summary, and description for any item that you put on the dashboard. And to do that, we have the security dashboard item builder class, and we'll see that in action later, but it makes it really easy to add items to the dashboard. All right, so we know what items and cards are. Let's go ahead and use the dashboard API to add some items for our OpenID Connect scheme to an existing card. As it happens, we have the perfect card to add to the authentication service card. You can see on here that other existing authentication schemes already add their own items to it. In this case, I've added an LDAP scheme to my station, and it is adding its own item to the card. Now, as we talked about earlier, to add items to an existing card, you want to use the security dashboard item provider interface. And your class will also have to implement the BI agent interface, and it needs to be an agent specifically on a security dashboard provider or a security dashboard provider agent. Here's part of the source code for Security Dashboard Item Provider. We can see that there are 3 methods to implement. First, we've got the set security dashboard item source. And this is a callback that'll let you store the B object that you'll be generating security items from. Second, we've got the security dashboard items version. And the version isn't actually used very much right now because the security dashboard is still kind of new. But at some point, all of these security settings that we've carefully defined, they're going to get out of date. When that happens, you'll want to patch your module and update your security dashboard code to reflect the new industry standards. And when you do, you would bump up this version. In our OpenID Connect example, one of the settings that's likely to need updating in the future is the allowed signature algorithms. Right now, SHA-256 is the industry standard, but nothing in security lasts forever. And finally, we have the Get Security Dashboard items, and this is kind of the star of the show. And it's the method that does all the work of building the list of items that you're going to add to the dashboard. So let's see what this looks like for our OpenID Connect scheme. The first thing to notice is that I've created a new class for this, which I've called OpenID Connect Scheme Dashboard Item Provider. And it implements BI Security Dashboard Item Provider and BI Agent. Next, we've got our Set Security Dashboard Item Source. And the main thing to note here is that we're casting our object to a B authentication service. And we know that we're getting an authentication service because we're an agent on BI Authentication Service Security Dashboard Provider Agent, and that is an agent on the authentication service. And that's just how the Security Dashboard Item Provider works. If you're an agent on a Security Dashboard Provider agent, you'll get whatever it's an agent on as the source. If you're an agent on a security dashboard provider, you'll get the security dashboard provider itself as the source. We also have the Get Security Dashboard Items version, which we've just set to 1 since it's our first iteration of this module. And finally, Get Security Dashboard Items. Earlier, we identified 3 controls that we wanted on the dashboard, and I've split each of those into their own method. They're all really similar, so we'll just take a closer look at one of them, Get TLS Item. What we're doing here is starting from the authentication service that we stored earlier and going through every OpenID Connect authentication scheme that might be in the station. We're checking each scheme's identity provider endpoint and making sure that it starts with HTTPS. If it doesn't, we're adding it to a list. At the end, if our list is empty, we use the Security Dashboard Item Builder to create an OK item to go in the dashboard. And if it's not empty, we add an alert that includes the names of the schemes that didn't pass the test. And the strings that are passed to the with summary and with description methods, those are just entries in the lexicon. And this is what we end up with. Just like the LDAP scheme, our items have been added to the authentication service card. And I went ahead and set the use JWT encryption property to false so that we could see an alert. And the other 2 items are there as well. Now, adding the items to the authentication service is actually pretty standard for an authentication scheme. But it may be that that just doesn't work for you. So maybe you want to link directly to the OpenID Connect scheme rather than the authentication service. Or maybe you took a look and saw that the authentication service security dashboard provider agent is part of the private API and you just don't want to use it. So let's see how to create a new card specifically for our OpenID Connect scheme. And there are a few ways to do it. The first one we'll look at is the security dashboard provider. This interface extends the security dashboard item provider interface that we just saw. But unlike the item provider, is not an agent on another class. It also has 2 extra methods that let you specify a hyperlink ORD and a header name. Let's take a look at the source code for that. And here's the first method, Get Security Dashboard Section Header. This returns a lexicon format info, which is just a lexicon entry and arguments. And it'll be used to generate the title of the card on the dashboard. The second method returns an ORD, and this will be the link on the card. If you want, you can return null or be ORD.default if you don't want to link to anything, but usually you'd link back to the component that has the security settings on it. And since it extends security dashboard item provider, we do have to implement the methods to return the version and the items that we've already talked about. But you don't have to implement set security dashboard item source, because in this case, the source will always be the class that's actually implementing security dashboard provider. So let's see what this looks like for our OpenID Connect scheme. The first thing to note is that I did not create a new class for this. My OpenID Connect authentication scheme is the security dashboard provider. I've also implemented the 4 methods that we talked about in the previous slide. First, we're getting the section header. In my module's lexicon file, I've added an entry for the header. That's just OpenID and then the name of the component in the station in parentheses. And I'm adding the component name because I might have multiple OpenID Connect schemes in the station. With the scheme itself being the security dashboard provider, that means I'm going to get one card for each scheme, and I want to be able to differentiate between them. Next, we've got the hyperlink ORD. I'm getting the nav ORD and relativizing it to the session. And we've just found that this actually works well if you're viewing the dashboard in the browser or in Workbench, and I would recommend just stealing this pattern and using it. And for the version, again, we're just returning 1. And finally, get security dashboard items. Now this part looks exactly the same as it did for the previous example, but if we drill down into get TLS item, we can see the difference. So now we're not iterating over every OpenID Connect scheme anymore because this provider applies only to one scheme. So what we're doing is we're just checking our own identity provider endpoint. And if it starts with HTTPS, we create an OK item. And if it doesn't, we create an alert. And you might remember that for the previous example, we added the names of the schemes that weren't using TLS, but there's no need to do that here because the scheme name is already going to be in the title of the card. So let's see what this looks like on the dashboard. This has all the elements that we just talked about. The scheme name is in the title. The title links back directly to the OpenID Connect scheme. And the encryption is disabled item doesn't list the name of the scheme anymore. The next interface that we're going to look at also lets you create a new card to add to the dashboard, and it is the Security Dashboard Provider agent. It extends Security Dashboard Provider that we just saw, and it has to be an agent on another type. And like the Security Dashboard Provider, you have to specify a hyperlink ORD and a header name, but in this case, you cannot skip the item source. The source code for this one isn't particularly interesting. We can see it extends BI agent and BI security dashboard provider. It doesn't have any new methods, and the real difference is how it's handled by the framework. Of course, since it implements or since it extends security dashboard provider, you do have to implement all the methods that we've already talked about today. All right, so for OpenID Connect, it looks like this. This is a little bit different from the other 2 examples we've seen, but it's kind of like merging the 2. We've created a new class, like we did for the first example, which was the security dashboard item provider. But in this case, we're an agent directly on the OpenID Connect authentication scheme, rather than having to be an agent on a security dashboard provider or provider agent. We're getting an item source again, but this time we're casting it to an OpenID Connect authentication scheme. And we know that's what we're going to get because we are an agent on that type, and that's just how security dashboard provider agents are handled by the framework. The next three methods are pretty much identical to what we just saw in the security dashboard provider example. And the only difference really is that we're using this OpenID scheme that we saved earlier to get the nav.ord and the display name. And we can see the same thing for the get security dashboard items method. It's exactly the same, except that once again, we're using that OpenID scheme. And this is what it looks like on the dashboard. And this is identical to what we just saw in the previous example. We just got there a little bit differently. But this isn't the only thing that we could have done with the security dashboard provider agent interface. If you look at both of the previous examples, there are a few issues. So it is entirely possible that someone might create a station that has a whole bunch of OpenID Connect authentication schemes in it. And if they do that, they're going to end up with one card for each scheme. In a way, that's nice because now each card is going to link straight back to the OpenID scheme that's causing the issue. But it's also not so nice because now all of your OpenID settings are scattered across a bunch of cards. And it's harder to see if you got it right. So let's see how we can use the security dashboard provider agent to create a single new card for OpenID Connect. The first thing to note here is that now I am an agent on the authentication service. And this is a safe choice because it's a common ancestor to all my OpenID schemes, and it's also guaranteed that there's only going to be one of them. And because I'm an agent on the authentication service, I know that in my set security dashboard item source, I'm going to get an authentication service that I can store away for later. In get security dashboard section header, I've created a new entry in my lexicon file. Unlike the old header, it doesn't need to reference any specific authentication scheme. It just says OpenID Connect. For the hyperlink ORD, I've decided to link back to the authentication service, but I could also have chosen to link to the authentication schemes folder that's inside the authentication service. But in either case, I'm not directly linking to an OpenID scheme anymore. And finally, for get security dashboard items, we're back to iterating over all the OpenID schemes, and we're creating a list of any schemes that had an issue with it. And that's exactly what we were doing in our first example. And this is what it looks like. It's really similar to the card that we saw when we were using the security dashboard item provider. Each item on here talks about either how all OpenID Connect schemes are okay, or it lists the ones that aren't. But the difference is that now the title says OpenID Connect, and there aren't any items from any other schemes like LDAP. And this is just what it looks like when everything is okay. So now that we've seen the three interfaces for adding things to the security dashboard, which one should you use? The short version is if you want your items on an existing card, you have to use the security dashboard item provider. If you want a new card, you can use either the security dashboard provider or the security dashboard provider agent. The security dashboard provider is fine in most cases, but if your component is really complex, you may want to pick the security dashboard provider agent. It'll let you split the dashboard code from the actual functionality of your component, and it can keep your code base looking a lot neater. There's actually more to it than that. You really want to think about how you want your dashboard to look. Are you okay with multiple cards being created? One of the benefits about the dashboard is that it groups the security settings together. If you're adding a new card for each OpenID Connect scheme, you're really not getting that grouping benefit anymore. And that might be okay if you're only expecting one scheme to be added, or if you're only allowing one scheme to be added. But what if there are 2 or 3 or 5? That would get really messy. So you could group them up like we did in our last example, but then you would lose the direct link to the OpenID scheme. If you want the best of both worlds, you could even create a new component or a new view that would be a hub for anything OpenID, and you would just link back to that. Probably way overkill for this example, but it's an option. And you also want to think about how you're presenting each individual item. There are cases where you need to check the same condition on multiple components. In our example, we looked at each scheme and checked if it was using TLS. We created a list and then created a single item that printed out that list. But we could also have created one individual item for each scheme. And the bottom line is there's really no right way to do it because each situation is different. What you want to do is think about how it's going to look and how easy it's going to be for the user to understand and fix any security issues that get flagged. Really, in the end, the goal of this security dashboard is just to make it easy to configure your station securely. So just keep that goal in mind and you'll be fine. And that's it for the security dashboard API. I think Stephen has a few more things to add, so I will pass it back to him.
Sure do, Melanie. That was absolutely fantastic. The content that you just covered there, not only is it extremely useful, but I think you really have hit on all the value props associated with the security dashboard. So thank you so much for your time. Blake, thank you as well. Really fantastic stuff. All right, so we've got some great content that's out there for you, and you can access it at any time. And as we go forward, we're going to continue to canvas the community with as much content as we can provide, because we really feel that it really helps us all. We're all talking the same language. We're on the same page with what the optimized strategies are to pursue to accomplish whatever thing that you are trying to do, solve whatever problem that you need. So from a resources standpoint, we have the Tridium University site, which is a fantastic interactive opportunity for you to kind of dig into some features in the Niagara framework at your own pace. So these are not guided, but gives you instead the chance to just kind of do it at your own pace. And we will be posting some 410 content here shortly. And there's a few things that have been trickling in over the past few weeks, but we do anticipate that we'll have some more content therein. So please take a look at that site when you get a chance. And then certainly, if you'd like to take a look at some previous Tridium talks, please feel free to do so. You can go to our new Tridium.com website, and you can take a look at the events tab. And under the events tab, you'll see a range of Tridium talks that we have presented over the past few months and years. And then, of course, if you're looking for some more pointed tips on how to solve a particular problem that you might be encountering on site, our Niagara Pro Tip series is a fantastic source to help you with those efforts. So we've got James Johnson and Kevin Mamachek that have been creating content for our Pro Tip series accordingly. And I do anticipate that you'll see some more things on the YouTube channel here coming up shortly. But with that being said, we now have the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have as a result of the demonstration. The one thing I will say is, given the breadth of content that was covered by Melanie, given some of the best practices that might be a little bit too much to digest given the time that we just had. So if there are any questions that you have following this demonstration, please feel free to reach out to tech support or to your sales representative, and we can get those questions answered accordingly. All right, first one. The security dashboard run on a Jace? Yes, it does, Matthew. Send the security service. So if you click on the security service within your service container, your Niagara station, you will see the security dashboard. All right. Melanie Blake, we have a question from Jacob. He's asking whether we are able to export these events to an SIEM.
We don't have any export functionality for the dashboard. And one important thing to note is that it's not an event-based system. So if you're looking at the security dashboard view, you're not getting live updates until you refresh. When you refresh the page, it will go and pull all of the different interfaces and grab the current state of things. We do have a JSON schema for the security dashboard, and we do have some APIs that allow you to get that JSON format. So it is possible that you could do something with that, but I don't think that that would help for the security incident event management.
All right, thanks, Melanie. All right, again, as I mentioned, if you don't have the time to post your question, again, feel free to do so following this TridiumTalk. And we greatly appreciate your insight. Any comments, observations that you might have, feel free to pass those along via tech support or your sales support channel as well. All right, so it seems that, Melanie, you have done such an exceptional job that you've covered all the questions that our customers may have had, given the time that we've allotted for this demonstration. So thank you for joining today. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your business. And as always, stay tuned to Tridium.com, to our resources tab as we continue to post more content that will enable you to be successful, to win more jobs, and to deploy the Niagara framework wherever you see fit and possible. All right. With that, we'll close the talk. Thanks again to everyone. Blake, Melanie, fantastic job. And I hope everybody has a fantastic Thursday.